Album rankings are dumb. We all know this. So why do we do them anyway, or even indulge them? Well, I'll tell you why I do them. Because I like talking about records. And I like comparing notes as far as what are my favorites versus what might be your favorites. But for me, there's no definitive, this is the best album by such and such band, or you're crazy for liking that one, or how can you like that one? I see these notes on Reddit all the time. You know, the Reddit pages for specific bands are like, which one is the best? Unpopular opinion, such and such album is better than the other one. I've always said, if you get 1,000 people who like a specific band in a room, you're going to get 1,000, well, maybe not 1,000 different answers, but you're going to get all sorts of different combinations as to which ones are the favorites. And even if 999 of those people pick the same favorite album, right? And one person picks, you know, the dark horse or the black sheep of the catalog that like most of the other people hate, to that person, that is the best album by that band. So this is the reasoning that got me into music journalism in the first place. I never wanted to say this is chiseled in stone as the blank best or the worst by this band. I think that's lazy. I think it's dumb. I think we all know we have different musical taste buds. Okay, blah, 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 blah. Stone Temple Pilots. Where do you stand on them? They are one of my all-time favorite bands, but it didn't start out that way. Sort of. I loved them from the very first note I heard, which was the song Plush on MTV in like the spring of 1993. But I thought, wow, that is a real serious Pearl Jam ripoff. I mean, wow, that's blatant. That's what I thought at the time. But I just loved the song so much, I couldn't resist the chord progression, the melody. I just couldn't resist it. I said, all right, well, and then I got the record, Core, their debut album, and I thought, man, again, this guy, this singer, Weiland, that's what he went by at the time, is really, like, able to, like, you know, do all these different imitations. He sounds like Eddie Vedder on Plush. Sounds like Chris Cornell on Where the River Goes, or what's that other song? Oh my God, Wearing Me Down of Apathy. That sounds like Chris Cornell. There's a moment on there where he sounds like Lane Staley from Alice in Chains. There's Sex Type Thing where he sounds like he's doing an Axl Rose impression. And I thought, man, these guys are just like late to the grunge party. And some record executive was like, yeah. Let's get these guys to do imitation grunge because, you know, we'll fool the kids. But again, I really liked the record anyway. I didn't find it authentic, but I liked it anyway. Okay, go a little bit further into their history. And in 1994, they have a song on the soundtrack to the film The Crow called Big Empty. And I'm like, that sounds a little more interesting. Actually, quite a lot more interesting and different than what I thought this band was. So then the album Purple is released, their sophomore record. And there are moments on there that I'm like, okay, these guys they've got something of their own. And yet there are also moments that at the time, again, I thought were complete grunge by numbers. I thought the song Meat Plow, I thought Silver Gun Superman, and even the song Vaseline, which I instantly fell in love with. I still thought, man, you know, they're just like seriously appropriating everything around them. Like I said, grunge by numbers. But then at a certain point later in their catalog, which I'll get into as I go through this ranking, I was just like, I was totally wrong about these guys. And it wasn't through fault of my own. They were putting us on that they were kind of a grunge by numbers, sort of, you know, alt rock, grunge, you know, calculated mannequin type thing, you know, flash over substance. They had us convinced, and little did we know what was actually going on, that these guys were really deep, particularly the band's creative center, Robert DeLeo. He's the bassist, but he plays guitar on a lot of those, on a lot of songs. Plays sort of like auxiliary guitar. He writes a lot of songs on guitar. I watched an interview with his brother Dean DeLeo, the guitar player, who said, Robert wrote a lot of our big hits. I just was lucky enough to play on them. So Robert and Scott Weiland in particular had these really kind of out there, unconventional tastes. They both loved bossa nova. They both loved 70s folk rock. Robert loves big band jazz, etc., etc., etc. And over time, you start to see this rear its head in their catalog. But even still, I wouldn't have classified Stone Temple Pilots as one of my favorite bands until 2020. I would, over those decades, songs like Meat Plow and certainly Silver Gun Superman grew on me, and I'm like, oh wow, okay, I actually don't think of these songs as just like fake, formulaic grunge. But I made a mistake. I reviewed their album Perdida, which is on its surface an acoustic record, but I think it's much more than that. This is post Scott Weiland's death, with their current singer Jeff Goot. They do this album Perdida in 2020, and I wrote a review saying this is the album that finally shows what these guys are capable of, that they've been teasing at for years and years and years, right? But I was wrong in my review, because I had never actually made it all the way through their fifth album, Shangri-La. So I'll get into all this. You'll see where these albums rank. But when I heard the beginning of Shangri-La, I thought, man, this album starts with this what I call their kind of like dumb, muscular, sort of steroid riff, grunge metal kind of thing. Why are they doing that? And then I gave up on the album, and I didn't listen to it until 2020. And then when I listened to that album and saw all the different contours and textures on there, and listened to that album over and over and over, plus all the stuff that I had already loved, plus the stuff that had grown on me over time, I'm just like, man, all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, 30 plus years later, but all of a sudden, these guys are one of my favorite bands. So what I'm not going to include is the official live albums that were released with the deluxe or super deluxe editions of Core, Purple, and Tiny Music. I don't think any of those really qualify as like the ideal live recording of this band, but I am going to rank a lot of stuff. I'm going to include Velvet Revolver. I'm going to include Army of Anyone. I'm going to include all the solo stuff, all the different projects they do. I am Sabby Reyes Kulkarni. This is Feedback Def, and welcome to the Stone Temple Pilots edition of Rankings Are Dumb. All right, I'm excited to get into this ranking, but let me just set the table further by reading from that review of Perdida that I wrote for Paste magazine in 2020. It's a cruel fact of life that even the most accomplished creative figures get reduced to thumbnail-sized descriptions that don't capture the full range of their careers. Stone Temple Pilots are no exception to this rule, but they ended up in that boat more or less by their own doing. After all, the Southern California Quartet conquered the mainstream in the 90s, at least initially, by pandering to the prevailing alt-rock tastes of the day. So if you envision STP as a bunch of calculating trend chasers who jumped on the grunge bandwagon with their 1992 debut album Core, that's because the band did an uncanny job of disguising its most unique attributes. Outwardly, guitarist Dean DeLeo's chunky riff work on Core followed the detuned Seattle blueprint, while late vocalist Scott Weiland appeared to mimic a who's who of then-popular singers. Unfortunately, Weiland's chameleonic tendencies obscured the breathtaking versatility and crystalline power of his voice, as well as his Bowie-like tendency to change guises almost from the inside out. legendary MTV cartoon characters Beavis and Butthead offered the following response to the video for Plush, Core's breakout hit. "Is this Pearl Jam?" asked Beavis. The reception from critics wasn't much better, although that didn't prevent the band from becoming MTV and commercial radio staples, or from achieving iconic status over the next 2 years. Even though the main two-note riff on 1994's Vaseline, the second single from the band's sophomore effort Purple, gives the impression that STP were aiming down to Beavis and Butthead's level, the B-flat major 13 sharp 11 jazz chord that permeates the ambiance of the song tells a different story. With Purple, the first signs of quirkiness began to define the band's sound at its outer edges, along with an increasingly apparent knack for amalgamating elements of classic rock and psychedelia. It was still far from obvious, though, that Weiland and bassist guitarist Robert DeLeo both harbored far-reaching tastes that extended well beyond the band's purview. Their next album would provide enough evidence for us to reasonably speculate whether DeLeo and Weiland would have found themselves equally at home in other, more challenging genres like jazz, art rock, and post-punk. Okay, so that's the overall picture. And shout out also to drummer Eric Kretz, whose playing I did not appreciate for many years. I thought he was very sluggish, one-dimensional, almost like held the band back and definitely the weak link, and I do not see him that way at all. I think he has a really, really distinctive character also. I think all the ingredients in this band, everybody brings something to the table that only they can do. And even though I thought of Dean DeLeo as the one who was more leaning towards this kind of like musclehead, rock riffing, that ended up also not being the case eventually. It may have started out that way, I'm not sure, but eventually his playing came to take on more dimension, as did my appreciation for it as well. So here we go. Let's get to it. At the very bottom of my list, I'm going to go with the second and last album by Velvet Revolver, which was Scott Weiland's group with Duff McKagan, Slash, and Matt Sorum of Guns N' Roses. I'm not a huge Guns N' Roses fan, although I do like them and appreciate them, and there are certainly things about their playing and their chemistry that I appreciate quite a bit, but I do not hear that in Velvet Revolver. I think they got worse as they went along. I hate this album. I just can't stand it, and it's the lowest on my list. Next, still scraping the very bottom of the barrel here, I'm going to go with the self-titled debut album by Art of Anarchy, a band formed by Disturbed bassist John Moyer with Guns N' Roses guitarist Ron Tal, who goes by Bumblefoot. He was never in GNR at the same time as Slash. This is their debut album. Scott Weiland sings on it. To my taste buds, this is an album of really run-of-the-mill nu metal, which is saying a lot because we're talking 2015 here, so way after you would have worn out your welcome, playing this style of music in a very sort of conventional vein. And so I don't think this material suits Weiland's singing at all. Maybe it's not even so much the style as it is the lack of inspiration, and his presence isn't enough to make it even remotely interesting, at least not for me. Strangely, when this album was released, the band put out a press release saying that this was a supergroup fronted by Scott Weiland, and he responded by saying, "This is a band I'm not even in. It was just something I was asked to do when I wasn't doing anything," which was weird, but it makes it sound like this was something he was never really invested in. It also sounds like he could have handled that more gracefully, but I personally don't think this album is all that worth fighting for, so I can kind of see where he's coming from. But look, if you disagree, by all means, let us know in the comments. I support it. In fact, I would love to hear from people who love this record. There's got to be at least one who's like, "Oh my god, no, I love this, is my favorite thing," or "I love STP and I love Scott and I think this was like the perfect marriage and it's too bad they only did one record." If you're out there, I want to hear from you. And then next up from that is the first Velvet Revolver album, Contraband. Now this has flashes for me. I do really appreciate what Scott Weiland brings to the table, and there are moments, like I would have gone to see them live around this point and I probably would have enjoyed it, but other than that, there's not much here. Next, I'm going to go with The Most Wonderful Time of the Year, Scott Weiland's well-intentioned Christmas album. Look, I know he was trying to do something really special or memorable, or at least I would think that he cares about this material, you know, some of the orchestral arrangements, like doing his sort of Frank Sinatra type thing. I love his voice, his artistry. As an artist, I consider him more than a singer. I consider him a complete artist. But I love his voice. I love Christmas music. Put the two together, and it's not like peanut butter and chocolate for me. I really don't like this album. It does not do anything flattering for my regard for his singing. And it doesn't evoke the Christmas spirit for me at all. So I don't like the way it reflects on his voice. I don't like the way it reflects on Christmas music. I think somehow he's ill-suited for these types of holiday songs. I don't know why that is, because he's suited for so many other different things, but it doesn't come together for me. Next up from that, I'm going to go with Happy in Galoshes, Weiland's double album, which I had immensely high hopes for. And I don't know why, but it just comes off as generic, which is the last thing I would want to put in the same sentence as him. Actually, it's the last thing I think of when I think of him. I don't think the word generic, except when I think of this record. Again, I give him points for trying. It's a double album, so there's bound to be something that you appreciate if you like him at all, but I don't feel him reaching. I don't really feel him showing his artistry. Next, I'm going to go with the first self-titled STP album, the one that brought Scott Weiland back into the band in 2010. So this is probably the only official STP album that I would say I don't like. Like, whenever I think about it, I'm like, yeah, I don't like that record. But I am crazy about the first two songs, which epitomize so much of what I love about this band. When I first pressed play on this in 2010, after these guys were back together, after what was nearly a decade apart, I was like, damn, they are back. And that guitar solo on the second song, Take a Load Off, is an example of why Dean DeLeo is one of my favorite guitar soloists ever. Unfortunately, for me at least, and if you're out there and you love this record, rock on, power to you. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm happy for you. But for me, the rest of the album drops off really steeply after that. I mean, I really like the songs Peacoat, Fast as I Can, and Dare If You Dare. I like those songs a lot, actually. Dare If You Dare is like an homage to the Beatles and All the Young Dudes rolled into one. But, you know, they're wearing it on their sleeve in a way that is respectable, because they're really giving it that STP signature and giving it their flavor. I know that's like half the album, right, that I like. So it's hard to say I don't like the album when I like half the album. But you know what it is? Those songs that come right after, Huckleberry Crumble and Hickory Dichotomy, I don't even hate those songs, but they just kill the momentum after Take a Load Off. And then you've got these syrupy, like, awful songs, awful to me, towards the end, like Cinnamon, First Kiss on Mars, and Maver, which are just sickeningly sweet to my ear. And I love the change towards the end of the last song, which is called About a Fool, but it's just a little too late by then. And I just feel this album like going on a down slope as it goes along. But I'll tell you this, if you put the first two songs on this album and just repeated those first two songs 5 times over, so it was like tracks 1 through 10, that alone would rank quite high on this list. It would actually rank higher than some other stuff. I mean, that's how much I love those two songs. It's too bad it didn't take long for things to go south with these guys again in terms of their, like, dynamic, their working relationship, and that this didn't last longer. But you could just tell, even looking at Scott Weiland at this point, that he was emaciated, and I don't know, I guess he wasn't that emaciated in the pictures, but he just seemed not all there. There seemed to still be this, like, this discord that was hard to put my finger on until it actually, bore itself out as being true. Sometimes, you can't go back home. In fact, most of the time you can't, but we got at least 2 amazing songs out of this reunion. I cannot say enough about those first 2 songs. They grab me, they move me. Any mix, like playlist or mixtape or CD that I would make of these guys, and by the way, I already did one. It's called the Epic Goddamn STP playlist on my Spotify, linked in the description below. Please do check that out. Next up from that, I'm going to go with the High Rise EP, their only release with the late Chester Bennington, famously of Linkin Park. I am not a Linkin Park fan. I'm not a Chester Bennington fan. I am a fan of this EP, and the only reason it ranks so low on my list here is because it's not a full-length record. Man, I wish they had released more stuff from this period. I don't know if they made more and just held on to it, or if they just kind of put out the first thing they could, as much material as they had. But boy, there's the spirit of this, the vibe, the tones. There's a moment on that first song that it's the first tune on the EP, and it's the first single they released, where it's like somebody hits a whammy bar on the whole song, and the whole song goes, and it takes my breath away. It's so sublime and wonderful, and it's like, man, this is why those of us who love this band, this is why we love them. Next up, I'm going to go with Blaster, Scott Weiland's solo album with the Wildabouts. This is not generic. It's not quite as out there as I would want from him, but it's solid. And there's shades of what we had come to appreciate and expect from him by this point. Okay, so next I'm going to go with the album New Love by the Japanese duo Bees, which is B''Z. Robert DeLeo plays bass on 5 songs on this record, so it's not even half the album, but I am including it here because those songs do really showcase his bass style nicely. And also, I think even though this style of hard rock that verges on 80s hair metal and pop isn't exactly my cup of tea, I do find this album as a whole really spirited in a way that appealed to me even before the music did. And eventually it won me over. And even if it hadn't, I find it very well crafted. I do think it warrants mention on this list. DeLeo did also play on 2 songs from a previous Bees record, but I'm going to have to say that doesn't quite qualify. But I am happy to include this in the whole, STP extended family of releases. Next, I'm going to go with MTV Unplugged, which wasn't officially released until the Core Super Deluxe box set expanded edition, anniversary edition. And like Alice in Chains and Nirvana, these guys did incredibly well in an acoustic setting. They really showed us that they weren't just picking up acoustic instruments, that they were well suited for this type of presentation and these kinds of arrangements and this kind of dynamic restraint, which would be a hint for later. Right? I mean, they showed us right out of the gate. This is after their first record. But that's also my complaint about it. That's the only reason why it ranks this low, because it's only 7 songs, and I wish we had been able to hear them do this in a more representative fashion of their entire, or not entire, but more of their catalog. I feel like the full hi-fi production of the MTV Unplugged studio and the way they filmed and recorded things and mixed things would have been much better suited for this band had they done it a little bit later. I wish they had done one in 96, and that would have been way high on my list. But yes, if you haven't heard it, it's really, 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 I mean, they really put their best foot forward on that Unplugged performance. So next I'm going to go with something that isn't even technically an album. It's also 7 songs. It's Dave Coots, who fronted Talk Show, the band that everybody else in STP started when they split from Scott Weiland for a while after Tiny Music. Boy, Dave Coots, I hope he puts out a record, and I hope he's listening, and I wish I could get the word out to him. Please put out a record, because even just his playlist on YouTube, man, he has got something really, really special. This stuff is catchy, it's memorable, it's really, 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 really sublime stuff. There's also, interestingly for STP fans, there's a song of his named Saturday, which ultimately became the song Glide on the album Number 4. That's really, really cool to hear the evolution there. He needs to put out a record, and if he put out like an actual album, even if he put these 7 songs with like 5 new ones, that thing would shoot way higher on this ranking for me. If you haven't heard that stuff, do check it out. I'll link to it in the show notes. Next, I'm going to go with One More Satellite, which is actually the new album. It was just out this year by Dean DeLeo and Pete Shoulder. This is a really, really, really enjoyable, solid record. My only ding, the only reason why I would ding it is because Pete Shoulder sounds a little uncomfortably much like Chris Cornell, and that kind of gets a little distracting after a while, but really, 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 really solid, enjoyable album that shows us a lot more shades of Dean DeLeo's playing than maybe we would have assumed. So next I'm going to go with their debut, Core. I'm conflicted on where to put this album because it hasn't held up all that well for me. There are certain songs that really, really do, and I do remember how exciting it was at the time to be getting into these guys, even though I thought the sound of this album was totally contrived. I had to rank this as low as I did because I think so much of what came after this album, these guys improved as writers, as artists, all in their respective lanes. A lot of this stuff still does hit me emotionally, but I can see why people, like when I listen to it today, I can see why there was a backlash to this band. I can see why it was easy not to take these guys seriously. Just to put this in perspective, there was a year-end issue of Rolling Stone. It was either in 93 or 94. I should have looked it up. But fans will totally know about this, where the Rolling Stone staff, their critics, voted STP as their least favorite band. But then in the same issue, STP won the readers' poll for favorite band. So that pretty much sums up what was going on around this band. They were like an immediate success, hugely successful, and then not taken seriously, and they were panned a lot, and other musicians spoke against them. Stephen Malkmus of Pavement famously referred to them as eligible bachelors in one of their songs. I forgot the name of the song. Like Billy Corgan was hostile to them. I once watched an interview with the late producer Steve Albini, of course, indie icon who produced many records. Jesus Lizard, the Breeders, oh my goodness, Slint, and of course In Utero, which was sort of an anomaly for him, right? He was like a towering figure in the indie underground of the 80s and 90s. So in this interview, he called them Stone Temple fuckheads, which I thought was ignorant and uncool. But I mean, I can't really blame him for taking this band at face value from what they themselves were putting forward. It was just sort of fashionable, I guess, to take shots at them. And when I listen to Core, I can see why that is. Emotionally, this record still hits me. I still feel that same rush of excitement that I felt when I first heard these guys and when I first sat down with this record in the spring of 93. But you're not really hearing the full range at all of what this band is. In fact, I don't even think you're really hearing what they are. I think they're presenting a certain way, almost masking themselves, but they just do it extremely well. And there's certain moments on here that really, really, really get me still, that I felt had a real drama and a real fire and a real... There's something really evocative about a lot of these songs. Like the mood was there. That song Sin on here is one of my favorites that they've ever done. And there's other moments like that. So a debut that really, really made a strong impression, perhaps in spite of itself. And I imagine for a lot of you watching, if you're already into this band, that for a lot of people that's their favorite. A lot of people are going to say, oh, that's my favorite album. Next, I'm going to go with Talk Show with the aforementioned Dave Coots. At this point in the band, they were uncertain whether they were going to get back with Scott, whether this was just like a detour or whether this was the thing that they were going to pursue from that point forward. I consider this a lost STP album. A lot of the songs that ended up on this record, they were debating whether they could go on Tiny Music, or what's the timeline here? I know there was I know they were like weighing like two sets of songs, like, well, this one could go with Scott, this one could go with Dave. It could have kind of gone either way. It's basically an STP record without Scott there, and the fact that they've done records since without him as well, you might as well include it in the catalog. Really, really, really solid. A little more glam, actually a lot more sort of glam, maybe more, and I hate this term, power pop-ish. There's more sort of, it's brighter in its overall vibe. It's more of a not decadent or hedonistic. That's not the right description at all. But it's more like flashy rock from the 70s, right? Scott Weiland is a much more moody lyricist. He's much more impressionistic. Couts is much more straightforward, and so you don't get this like party vibe from it, but it's closer in that direction than anything else STP has done. So you get to see them kind of unburdened. And like I said, really, really solid. A different flavor though, like very different than what came right before it, which is Tiny Music. This is more direct, more straight ahead. Again, a little more glammy, a little more flashy. Maybe they're having a little more fun, sort of indulging the surface trappings of rock more on this record. And you want to hear something funny? Speaking of that, I had thought for years that I was mishearing the lyrics of this one song, and I would always hear it as, "Everybody loves my car," and I was like, there's no way that's the actual name of the song. I'm just mishearing it. It turns out that is actually the name of the song, but I don't read it as Coots being superficial here. I think it's supposed to be tongue-in-cheek or even like a sly or playful statement on that kind of song. Because there's just too much, for all the, like I said, this is like not quite a party record, but it's a little more sort of glammy and power poppy, and in that sort of stratosphere lyrically, there's just a little bit too much disclosure and wit on Coots's part for this to be like 100% a serious song about his car. The fact that they had the nerve to call a song that actually adds to the charm. These guys also self-produced it, which I'm presuming to mean that the DeLeo brothers were the ones helming the production, and they kind of emphasized his vocals in this power pop vein where it sounds really candy-coated. I mean, he does have a voice that's quite reminiscent of Robin Zander, but with more of an edge, and he does certainly have his own style. But in some of these live recordings that are on YouTube, you really get to hear how powerful his voice was. And I'm actually surprised this album totally stiffed the way it did, like commercially. Their sales were already down with Tiny Music, and Scott's solo album 12 Bar Blues sold extremely poorly as well. So this seems like it's a case where maybe this fan base, at least back then, just wanted what they wanted. I hope that's changed over time, and that more of the fan base has gotten more receptive to some of these other flavors. I mean, on the other hand, I feel like maybe it was too much of a shock for STP fans, including me at the time. I only kind of forced myself to sit down and listen to this whole album years after the fact, and I'm glad I did, because I finally got to appreciate this album as a whole, and I finally heard the song Fill the Fields, which is yet another really powerful, beautifully moving moment from the DeLeos, which is something they specialize in, whether working together or apart. I hope this album has its fans among the fan base. In fact, I know it does. And if you love this album, rock on with that. I totally know where you're coming from. So next, I'm going to go with 12 Bar Blues, Scott Weiland's debut solo album from 1998, which arrived during that period where the future of STP was uncertain. I sometimes take to this album like a fish to water, and then sometimes I find it very challenging. Like, sometimes it hits me just right, and sometimes, honestly, it gives me a headache. Like, oh my god, I can't listen to this right now, which makes it hard for me to rank. But I have to say, whichever mood I'm in at any given time, I always find it fascinating. And I always marvel at how creative and just individual sounding it is. I mean, this guy definitely had an imagination. This record, to be honest, also shows how pretentious he could get if left to his own devices. But in this case, the pretentiousness works in his favor, I think. I mean, there's a real charm to how far he's willing to go. Just that piano intro to Barbarella, for one. I mean, there's a lot of different things I could point to on here, but the fact that they released that as a single says a lot to me about where the headspace was here. So this is Scott working with producer-collaborator Blair Lamb, also multi-instrumentalist Victor Indrizzo, and Porno for Pyro's bassist Martin Lenoble, among others. I mean, Daniel Lanois and Brad Meldau are on here. Sheryl Crow as well. This record is a gurgling soup of like programmed beats, David Bowie-inspired glam revival, like 90s style, and I don't even know what the fuck else, to be honest. There's like abrasive noise on here that actually gets Weiland as close to a truly avant-garde release as he ever got. These mixes are very trebly. There's a lot of treble. I originally had this album on CD, but listened to it most after I dubbed it onto a cassette, which I think made all that treble more palatable to my ear. I don't think I can even listen to it on Spotify, but I have to give Weiland credit here just for going out on a limb, just for really going for it. I remember just being so impressed that, okay, he has a muse and he's in pursuit of it, and I just love that aspect of this album. Now, the song Where's the Man is a song that I think most closely resembles STP, and when you hear his vocal melodies on other songs like The Date, Divider, and About Nothing, you can definitely hear how those melodies originated from the same creative source as his singing on Tiny Music. But check out these descriptions from some very prominent critics, starting with Stephen Thomas Erlewine of AllMusic. He wrote, 12 Bar Blues is an unpredictable, carnivalesque record. Scott Weiland is fascinated by sound, piling on layers of shredded guitars, drum loops, and keyboards, making sure that each song sounds drastically different from its predecessor. And then there's senior Rolling Stone critic David Frick. I love how he said, 12 Bar Blues isn't really a rock album or even a pop album. That's right, it's neither. And finally, and this is most notable, Pitchfork founder Ryan Schreiber, or Schreiber, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but in his review, he called this, quote, easily the most innovative album Weiland has ever produced for public consumption. Not just a deeply personal record, but also a very intelligent one. That's saying a lot coming from the guy who single-handedly launched the era of music snobbery and was unapologetic when Pitchfork destroyed careers with their 0.0 reviews infamously. You can look that up. I'll link to an article about that in the description. But yeah, I mean, I think that all basically sums it up. Now, next on my list, Lessons Learned, Robert's solo album from 2021. His only one to date. Gorgeous, rich, textured, layered, beautifully arranged. I mean, you really get to hear like a window into Robert's musical mind. This is like a 70s folk rock, just, you know, like lazy, beautiful sounds just pouring out of your speakers from an AM radio, you know, from the house across the street kind of vibe. And again, gorgeous, but also very, very, very subdued. This is what we expected Robert could do all along, but it's well worth it. Pete Shoulder, who I mentioned earlier, is on this record as well, just not as much of it, because the vocals are split up between 6 different singers, including Robert DeLeo himself on one track. So that definitely helps mix things up. I personally feel like the singers mostly hold this album back, because if you just listen to the instrumentation, it's a really refined take on country folk. And the way these singers approach a lot of this material, to me, feels really conventional, except for Jimmy Necco, Johnny Irion, and even Robert himself. The songs What Will Be, which is sung by Jimmy Necco, and What'll I Do, probably the most powerful love song in the whole extended family of STP and STP-related recordings. You know, aside from maybe Still Remains and So I Know and, you know, Sour Girl and others. But this one totally nails that feeling of being so head over heels with someone that you feel like you're going to die inside without them. Actually, I wish this whole album had been sung by Johnny R.E.M. Man, he steals the show here. You should really check out his album Sleeping Soldiers of Love from 2024, where he worked with Wilco's, Pat Sansone, and Mike Mills from R.E.M. And then his new album, Johnny R.E.M. and U.S. Elevator, also with Pat Sansone, that Robert DeLeo actually appears on as well. But going back to lessons learned, there are certain changes these songs go through that are subtle, but really dramatic and moving. Kudos to Robert DeLeo for being bold enough to go out on a limb and show us a different shade of his inspiration and really stand in that and say, hey, this is part of what I am too. Now, along those lines, Trip the Witch, which is Dean's collaboration with session guitarist extraordinaire Tom Bukovac, who has his own series on YouTube as well, which I'll link in the show notes. This album is gorgeous. It's rich. It shows us different sides to each of those players. Bukovac is best known for his session work in Nashville. So he does a lot of country, a lot of roots rock, but he's also a big rock fan and grew up loving STP. So we get to hear that side of his playing on this, and we get to hear a more delicate, subtle finesse from Dean, which I had never presumed was there. Now, I should mention Dean is one of my favorite soloists, like, of all time. Like, I just love his guitar solos. He's easily in my top 5, probably in my top 3, actually. And I'm not a big, like, guitar solo lover, but I just love the way he composes his solos and makes them like a piece of music within a piece of music, and they always lift the song, and I'm always like, wow, I always feel like I'm lifting up when he plays his solos. Not always, but a lot of the time. But here, there's all these gentle, delicate touches that are just, like I said, gorgeous. I should also give a shout out, I forgot to mention this. Ryan Williams is a multi-instrumentalist, engineer, producer whose working relationship with Stone Temple Pilots goes back a long way. He started working at Southern Tracks in Atlanta, Georgia, right after college. Southern Tracks is, of course, where Brendan O'Brien, producer, cut his teeth. So Ryan Williams has worked on a ton of records, STP, Pearl Jam, Deftones, Slayer, Kelly Clarkson, and on and on and on. But you can really hear his touch on a lot of these latter-day releases, including Trip the Witch and One More Satellite, and also works with STP as well. He has done an amazing job. If you listen to Trip the Witch, all the subtlety in there, the way he builds in the mix, he's indispensable to the STP camp, and he hats off to him. He really deserves a shout. You really should look into his work and really pay attention on these latter-day records to the mixing. The production values are incredible. Now, the only thing about this record, if you're going into it, that you should know is that it's very, very, very subdued. Like, in the middle of the record, there's not much going on that's going to grab you and shake you by the collar. You really have to lean in and listen to this and accept this record on its own terms. It's like listening to somebody who's really quiet and reserved have a conversation with you where you have to hold back from talking over them, or you might miss something really important. Next, I'm going to go with number 4. This album doesn't, I'm not on board with this album all the way through. Like, it doesn't knock me out from start to finish. In fact, it starts off with a really, what I would call a big, dumb rock musclehead riff that I don't think they should have been even bothering with that type of tune at this point in their careers, considering, you know, how they had started to branch out by this point. But I will say, the songs on here that grab me really grab me. There's, sort of the inverse of the big dumb rock thing. There's an awesome riff song, like a riff-based, really heavy riff song that totally does it for me. It's called Heaven and Hot Rods. It's got a really interesting rhythmic structure. It's like super cool, really awesome groove. This is the kind of thing from Eric Kretz that I'm like, man, only Eric Kretz could do that groove in that way, where you see how indispensable he is to the mix. So there's about 4 or 5 songs that I feel that way about super strongly, like Sour Girl, Glide, And I listen to this a lot more, a lot more than Core. I always go back to those songs. I listen to them quite frequently, so that's why it ranks this highly on my list. Okay, so next, I'm going to go with a compilation of Scott Weiland cover songs, which sounds like it would be the title of a tribute album to him, like his songs done by other people. But it's actually an album of his versions of other people's songs, obviously. In any case, this was a digital-only release from 2011 that was supposed to accompany the release of his memoir, but he decided to put it out sort of on the side there. I like this album a lot, actually. My immediate reaction on hearing about it was, well, that's not the period I would prefer to hear from him, because I don't think he was exactly in his prime in 2011. And I know this stuff wasn't all recorded around that time, but a lot of it does sound like it. I find this album perfectly enjoyable and kind of spunky. There's a moxie to these versions that really appeals to me, but it's also just very loose, like not over the top, trying to be artistic with a capital A, like 12 Bar Blues, for better and for worse with 12 Bar Blues, depending on your perspective, or depending on my mood that day. This album is quite unassuming, and it just doesn't demand much of you, so there's this temptation to just dismiss it as a kind of a side dish, or really an insignificant trifle that he didn't even bother to do a proper release for. But the fact that it's so unassuming and undemanding is, I think, one of its biggest strengths. And I think it's pretty gutsy of him to cover Nirvana and to do a really respectable job of it too. I mean, he's not trying to do anything groundbreaking here with any of these songs. And a couple of the tunes, like one of the Beatles tunes he covers, one of the Bowie tunes he covers, are really, really, really obvious. And honestly, I don't walk away from this record being able to say anything about what it shows us about his singing. Like, that doesn't even like register with me here. Because I don't think it shows us anything about his singing, actually. It's just a really casual affair, and that works surprisingly well. There isn't a single song on here that I don't like. I mean, this is just a very satisfying listen from start to finish, and for me, maybe even the most consistent listen on this entire list, believe it or not. Like, it's not uneven at all for me. Most of the other records on here have peaks and valleys, but this one is just steady, steady, steady as she goes, and that goes a long way for me. And it's saying a lot that in spite of some of his choices being, like I said, really obvious songs from the catalogs of a couple of these artists, Bowie and the Beatles in particular, this still totally works for me. I would say put this on quietly in the background or at a moderate volume when you're just trying to chill, or maybe cooking dinner or entertaining a small group of friends or coming in after a long day, and let this album work its discreet magic on you. Try it. See what happens. And let me know how it sits with you. Okay, next I'm going to go with an album that shocks me for being this high, which I will be honest with you, I did not listen to until the other day. I never bothered with this record. I love STP. I really, really like Filter. In fact, you could say I love Filter. I never expected much from that combination. I thought that combination of people would just be not to my liking. I'm talking about the 2006 self-titled album, the only one we ever got, from Army of Anyone. It's the DeLeo brothers, Richard Patrick from Filter, and drummer Ray Luzier, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. But, man, I was wrong. Just from start to finish, this album is a total banger, and it's got really these breathtaking moments. You combine the different approaches to songwriting, the two or three that you get here, and you get so many soaring moments that just fill me up, that just make me swoony, right? A lot of that stuff. Look, I consider Richard Patrick kind of like the Hebrew National of alt rock. Very dependable, you know what you're getting. There's times where I think he, for my liking, hews a little bit too much toward the commercial sort of, modern rock radio, kind of like real intentionally commercial mall rock kind of stuff that I think is a little bit drippy and ridiculous, but I happen to love it. I love Filter in spite of my reservations, and I was not expecting, like I said, the best of both worlds here, and you do get that. Really, 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 really solid, enjoyable, like I said, very swoony, very, very moving, breathtaking record. Okay, so now we're down to the top 5. And coming in at number 5, I'm going to go with STP's second self-titled album, this one from 2018, the first album with Jeff Goot. I can't say enough about just how, I don't even want to say solid, because that makes it seem like it's just solid, like this is more than solid. This is excellence. This is fine-tuning what your band is and still showing that you've got all the goods and you can cover so many bases and put so much into put so much into your songs. I don't know what else to say about this album except it's stacked with great material, new shades as well, and is really, really, really like the perfect suitable showcase to bring a new singer on board. And there's a lot of really heartfelt lyrics as well, which, Weiland could really, really, really conjure a mood, but some of his lyrics are really impenetrable as far as what he's actually saying. Like, they're so poetic, right? He's so artsy in his approach. Jeff Goot is more direct, but he's more vulnerable, more introspective, more from the heart than Dave Couts. So there's a lot going on here. Production values on this self-titled album among the best that the band has ever achieved, in my opinion. So next, I debated whether to flip these next two. I debated for a long time which way to go here. I'm going to go with Perdida because, well, I've already talked about it. I think it is a magnificent record. I think it is up there among what I consider to be the highest achievements that this band has ever done. It's one of my favorites by them. Without reservation, I would put it up there. We're now at the last 4 albums, and you could almost say all 4 of these records are a tie. I almost put this in the number 3 slot because I love it from start to finish. It really, really, really holds me, just grabs me from start to finish, probably more than anything else they've ever done. It's not just an acoustic record. It's like, man, we are showing you how deep we can get. It's beautiful. It's heartfelt. It's sincere. It's mature. It's like such a late career triumph from a band, and I wouldn't have expected it at all. But then again, I'm not surprised either when you consider what who we're dealing with. It's very, very seasoned. I cannot say enough about this album. And the only reason it is beaten out in the number 3 slot by Purple is because of my emotional attachment to Purple. Most of Purple now I'm on board with totally. Most of it. I think there's one song, Kitchenware and whatever that song is called, that I don't absolutely love, but the rest I do. But for me, if I had to stack these 2 records, like if I had a blindfold on and I didn't know anything about this band and I had never heard them and I was just going through their catalog one by one, I would lean towards Perdida as the album that really does it for me more. But because that summer of 1994, this album just took me to a transcendent place because of that nostalgia, because of the memories, I have to put Purple above Perdida. Just on my love for the song Vaseline alone. I said this in my review, the Joe Perry Project concert review that video that I did, which you should check that out. I talked about this, how when I think of the word summer, the song Vaseline is fused together. To me, Vaseline and summer are one and the same. The rush I get of feeling 21 and just digging into life for the first time, that feeling and discovering so much more music, and then this riff comes along, which I initially thought was a big dumb riff. Initially thought was a big dumb riff that I couldn't resist. I loved it anyway. But just the sparkle when that solo comes in, man, it just makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And there's many moments like this on this record. Still Remains, Big Empty, Army Ants, lots and lots of stuff like that. Even Loungefly, I feel, has this atmosphere that just fused with the time period. This will forever be part of the soundtrack of my life in my early 20s. It's a time that you can't get back, right? That you can only access through music, and you don't realize, you know your life is ahead of you, but you don't realize just how much you're going to look back on that time period and reach for it and wish you could squeeze it and hold on to it like a pillow, clutching at a pillow and holding it to yourself. The fragrance of your youth, it's captured on this record. That's my number 3 slot. In the number 2 slot, Shangri-La, which starts with a big, dumb steroid muscle riff. And then goes everywhere under the sun that you can imagine STP going. I mean, Bipolar Bear, Positive Self-Regeneration, I think it's called Regeneration, Black Again. Whew. Well, when you start thinking about the folk rock aspect, like the 1970s classic AM radio type vibe, the Laurel Canyon element that they were looking to explore, they do it here, and boy, do they ever pull it off. I have listened to this record probably the most of anything by them since 2020. I loved that feeling of like discovering something new for me at the time, but by a band that had been, a part of my life for so long by that point. And so it was like the best of both worlds. It was like, oh, this feels new and fresh, but it's from something that's really, really familiar and really important to me. This is the album that put them over the top, where I realized, no, they're one of my favorite bands, period. Like, once I heard the full record, after hearing the first song, I thought, oh my God, these guys are, back to their old tricks. They're not really stretching. Boy, was I wrong, and boy, am I happy that I was. And okay, drum roll, please, for my favorite STP album in the number 1 slot. It's no surprise, after everything I've said, I have to go with Tiny Music, Songs from the Vatican Gift Shop. This is the album where I realized, oh my God, these guys are for real. They've got shades of glam, shades of a little tiny bit of post-punk, a little bit of jazz thrown in there. There's a bossa nova ballad, piano ballad on here, which is one of my favorite songs by them. It's called And So I Know. It's probably the most beautiful thing they've ever done. Every time I hear that song, I'm like, thank goodness that whatever needed to take place in the universe for this miracle of a tune to be made and sound exactly as it is, and for us to be able to hear it is like a conspiracy of beauty in the universe and the machinations of nature, that we got a song that beautiful. And from these people who I least expected it from, I heard that song, blew me away. Every time I play that song for people, only one person in 30 years almost has ever guessed properly who that song is, and that's because I gave them a hint. It's the last band you'd expect. But most of the time I play that song for people, they're like, wait, what? That's Stone Temple Pilots? What? So that just goes to show. And there's other moments on this record. I mean, Adhesive, even just the rock stuff on here has so much more texture and dimension than what we had heard prior from these guys. I mean, the leap from Core to this, and the end of the way the album ends, the album goes into its final fade out. That electric kind of shimmering guitar fades before the clean guitar does. So you get a little bit of the guitar more up close, like the natural acoustics of it, of the string strumming, before that also fades out. I just think that is the perfect touch of an ending to a wonderful, wonderful record. Even the beginning of the album, that instrumental jam with Brendan O'Brien on Fender Rhodes. This album is just such a creative breakthrough for them, and apparently I wasn't the only one who was convinced by it. Check this out. Billy Corgan, who eventually came around on the band, had this to say. It was their third album, Tiny Music, that got me hooked. A wizardly mix of glam and post-punk. And I confessed to Scott, as well as the band, many times, how wrong I had been in assessing their native brilliance. And like Bowie can and does, it was Scott's phrasing that pushed his music into a unique and hard to pin down aesthetic sonic sphere. But let's hear from none other than Scott Weiland himself.
But if I was on a desert island and it was one of my albums that I had to choose from, I would choose Tiny Music.
And is that the one that you're most proud of?
I think that's STP's most creative album.
I felt these guys were on top of the world then. Interestingly, this is where the this album was released at a point where the grunge backlash is starting to really rear its head. So this album, Down on the Upside by Soundgarden, No Code by Pearl Jam, all the sales went way down. All those albums went platinum, but the bands before, all three of those bands had multi-platinum records, and by 96, things really start to kind of crater, and these bands are still, again, selling 1 million copies in the States, but you can tell the tide is turning, and yet I think all three of those records are among the most daring, adventurous, creatively bold that any of those bands ever did. This is my favorite STP album. Rankings are dumb, but thank you for joining me anyway. Do let me know in the comments what your favorite STP and STP related albums are. Hit me with your ranking. Tell me where you think where we're on the same page, where we're totally not on the same page, where you might think I'm crazy, etc., etc. You know what to do in those comments. You know what to do with the like, subscribe, notification button so you never miss a post. Please do check out other videos, on my channel. For feedback, thanks for hanging with me. Over and out.